Hi, this is Dave back in the garage with my Project 944. The last video I had some problems. I was trying to replace the rod bearings and one of the rod bolts broke, and it kind of bummed me out, but things happen. So anyway, I checked on the boards and got some advice from you people out there, and it was really nice. Everything pointed to pretty much replace that rod, or at least the rod bolt, and that meant I needed to pretty much take it apart. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to replace those rods, or at least the rod bolts, and to do that I'm going to have to remove the front end, which I have to do anyway because to replace those bearings, and to remove, of course, the cam tower and the head.
Starting at the front of the engine, I release the balance shaft belt.
I take some of the other stuff off here, but I'm just trying to figure out how to get this thing off. It takes a little bit of maneuvering to get it out, and there's also a roller that needs to come off right there that before it comes out. Also pull apart some of the crankshaft pulley there. I make a couple of marks on the crankshaft pulley in reference to the belt, so I kind of know about where to put it back. Here in the timing belt, it's still kind of tight even with the tensioner released. I'm just trying to go through and figure out how to remove it. I'm also trying to pull off these balance shaft bolts. That gear was tight on there. And going back to the timing belt, I had to use a screwdriver to kind of pry off that belt. There's a special tool that you use to get those bolts off the balance shaft. The top balance shaft gear came out okay, it just slid right off without a problem. The bottom one though seemed it was kind of stuck on there. So, and I didn't really have a bearing puller or anything, or a way to get it off. I think this is a steering wheel puller, and I just kind of made that work. I removed that little key from those balance shaft gears with some side cutters. Now I'm removing that back cover, removing all the 10mm bolts there. Now around the crankshaft, someone had already made a hole like that. They had cut through it, and I didn't have to pull the crankshaft gear off. But I'm pulling the crankshaft gear off now, and there's the remnants of the rest of the back cover. And I also removed the key. From here, I'm removing those tensioners for the alternator and the power steering. I don't have power steering on my car, but this engine had power steering, so I'm removing that. Next, I'm removing the water pump, which are held on by several 10mm bolts. Matter of fact, all the bolts on the front of the engine, except for the crankshaft, were either 10 or 17mm. You can see that the insides of the water pump's a bit rusty, so I'll probably have to replace that. Now that everything's off the front of the engine, now it's time to remove the cam tower. I'm using an extra long Allen head, a 6mm Allen head socket to get those bolts off. The first thing I do is I go around and I loosen them a little bit at a time. I don't take them out or loosen them very much all at once, and then I'll loosen them the rest of the way. There are times where I have to get a magnet to, if the bolt falls in the tower, I have to get a magnet to fish it back out. While removing, it's important to be very careful so those lifters don't fall out. They slide out really easily. Next is to remove the head. And I did the same thing I did with the camshaft tower, which I just loosened them up a little bit here and there. Now these things are really tight, and I've actually had to get like a breaker bar to start them. Also try to loosen them in somewhat of a pattern so I don't do one side all at once. I just kind of evenly space it out as much as I can. Now that the cylinders are exposed, the tops of the pistons had a lot of carbon on them, and there's a lot of bits and pieces in there that are all broken loose. And I had to get a vacuum to vacuum it out, and also wiped them out with some oily paper towels. So I planned on using a ridge reamer to remove that ridge from the top of the cylinder. I put those oily towels in there to kind of protect the pistons from any falling stuff, and hopefully just make things easier to clean. I've never used one of these ridge reamers before, but it was fairly straightforward. And even though I'm pretty sure I used it right, it kind of scraped up the top of the cylinder a little bit more than I think it should have. In hindsight, I probably didn't even have to do this. I just probably could clean it a different way. And since I was hoping to reuse the piston rings, I just didn't want them to be damaged. One thing I found kind of difficult was to line up the scraper just underneath that ridge. I just had a hard time seeing it, so I kind of used my phone there to zoom in and see if I was in the right place, and also to adjust it up and down and find exactly where that was. It felt like I needed a third hand, but I guess with a little more experience, this would be easier. Once it looked like it was set right, and I started using it and scraping that reamer, scraping that ridge off, at the bottom part, it looked like it was scraping a little more off than it should, and indeed it did. It kind of scraped into the aluminum, which was kind of concerning. But from what I understand, since it's up above the ring line for the piston rings, it should be okay. And I'm gonna hope for the best on that. Now this is the results after running that reamer. On the top of the cylinder here, or the intake side, it looks pretty good. But on the other side, the exhaust side, it looks like it scraped it a little bit more. It was a little concerning, but what can I do? So next I'm removing the rod and piston for cylinders 2 and 3. I had torqued 2 and 3. 2 is the one that broke. 3 actually torqued also, and it didn't feel right, so I think something's wrong with that. With number 3 out, you can see where that connecting rod bolt had stretched. Now I can get a better view of the cylinder walls. This is number 1. It's got a few scratches toward the top by the ridge the rim, but it's not horrible. This is number 2. It's got a couple of scratches too that you could catch your finger on, but also it's got that scrape right there from that ridge reamer that took a little bit more than I think it should have. This is cylinder 3, has a little scratch in it. Yeah, you can feel it with your fingernail, but otherwise the rest of the cylinder seems okay. Cylinder 4 is kind of the worst with the scratches. There's a big one right there, and there's a few other ones in there that you can feel. This is the other side of cylinder 4. You can see the scratches there too. Here you can see the connecting rod bolts. You can see the one on the left being stretched. It was, I don't know if it was the torque wrench or if it's just a weak bolt or what happened. I know the torque wrench was set correctly, so I'm not sure what caused this. And here's something to note. The connecting rod bolts, this one here is the original, the old one, and the newer one is on the right. That one has some ridges on it versus the old one that is flat. So now that I can see inside the cylinders, and there's pretty deep scratches, you can feel them with your fingernail. I don't think there's got to be more than 25,000 miles on this thing, and there's no telling how many miles there is on it. So, matter of fact, my old engine may be just as good, so if not better. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take it apart, check it out, and see how it looks. I will see if I'll check the bore to see how far off of tolerance it is. And it's going to be a learning experience too, but that's the plan now.